Well, with me to discuss the Prime Minister's meeting with the President are two members of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, the Labour MP for Ilford South, Mike Gapes, and the Conservative MP, Andrew Rossendale, who represents Romford. And I'm joined by Skype from the Isle of Lewis by Angus MacNeil, the SNP's Deputy Foreign Affairs Spokesman. Very good evening to you all. Gentlemen, we'll stay with you, Mr MacNeil. And I know you've said that Theresa May's visit to Washington looks a bit desperate, but if she has rekindled the special relationship, it looks like it's worth it, doesn't it?
Well, I think like a budget speech from Gordon Brown, you're just getting the highlights at the moment, and probably the detail will come out. We've heard talk about privatising the NHS, or at least making it open for American companies to do even more within the NHS than they are. So the devil will be in the detail, but the gloss looked good. One thing that was pretty clear is that Donald Trump changes with the wind. Who knows what he's doing tomorrow? It was also interesting to see that the press corps in the States were very interested in his relationships with Russia and Mexico. And I think that's what the big emphasis and the big concern is, for them at least. OK, well, Mr Rossendale, the gloss looks good. Mr MacNeil did accept that. Do you think it's more than gloss?
Oh, absolutely. Britain and America are very old allies and great friends, and it's wonderful that the special relationship is being put back on track just at the time that Britain is looking out to the wider world, and having a trade agreement and closer cooperation with our American friends is fantastic news, and it's thanks to Theresa May that we've got that special relationship firmly back on the right track
I look
so
at
quickly.
I think Mr Gapes is as well. Having a trade agreement, I mean, you're jumping the gun a bit there, aren't we? I mean, you know, that would infuriate the European Union. And it would be, I mean, knocking one out in what, half an hour, a trade agreement with the United States. What did you make of it?
The special relationship is a kind of phrase that Americans talk about when they want to tickle us and make us feel good. The reality is that America has very close relationships with a number of countries, Canada and Mexico as neighbours.
And well, perhaps not too close with Mexico.
Well,
at the moment.
no, actually, I'm sure at some point they'll sort this out. The British position is weakened. We were always regarded by the Americans as a bridge to Europe. But now we're going to leave the EU. We've got a potential problem here. And I'm not sure that actually a relationship that is based upon us desperately trying to get a deal with an anti-free trade American president who does, as Angus said, have a view about the role of the private sector in the health service and so on.
Seem to be getting on
it's a good idea.
I mean, we don't know much about, judging from the news conference, what talks there have been, if any, detailed talks about trade, but we seem to be getting onto that. And I'll come back to you before I go to Mr MacNeil and Mr Rossendale about that. The threat, the American health companies, the pharmaceutical companies, if there is a trade deal, they're going to want access to our health market, and that means the NHS.
Well, the beauty of this is that unlike the TTIP agreement, which we were only partners in with the EU, any future agreement between the United States and the United Kingdom is bilateral. And therefore, if there's something we don't like, we can say no.
Then we don't get a deal.
Within the EU, we can't say no. So actually, all the fears that Angus and Mike have about the possibility that it could interfere with the NHS, privatising, it's not going to happen because we in Parliament would be able to vote on that. Within the EU, we get vetoed.
OK, I mean, much more of that is going to come out, but I want to talk now, Mr MacNeil, about what we did hear there. And one of the things Theresa May said, and Mr Trump did not challenge it, was that he is now fully committed to NATO. That looks like a real achievement for the Prime Minister, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I think she was also saying that the European allies have to spend 2% of GDP as well, which would have been music to Donald Trump's ears. I think the issue with Donald Trump is that what he's happy with today or what he's unhappy with tomorrow might change by the middle of next week again. And Donald Trump's an interesting character to watch. It wouldn't surprise me if Donald Trump was to resign in the huff as President of the United States some way down the line. He's a very unstable character, and I pity the Queen, who's going to have to host him for a state visit. And I heard he's wanting to go to Balmoral as well, which is actually a private home. But we do know that he has his Scottish ancestry. His mother was from Lewis. So who knows what we're going to see by the end of this presidency with Mr Trump. But the sort of noises he's been making internationally so far have actually not been good. He was on his best behaviour today, perhaps, but time will tell.
Well, that's a point, isn't it, Mr Gapes? You know, that he does seem to change his mind. And he mentioned that at that news conference, didn't he? You know, when he talked about how he judges people, he says sometimes he sees people he thinks he won't like, and then he changes his mind. It can go the other way.
It's quite clear he was I think he was scripted today. And he clearly was not tweeting today. So he was very much, it was about presenting himself as a more responsible leader to the world. And I thought Theresa May did very well at the press conference, turning to the side, looking him in the eye and saying, Mr. President, you're 100% committed to NATO. He could hardly say, no, I'm not. I think it's obsolete, which is what he said a few weeks ago.
And Mr. Rossendale, let's hear it for the British press there, particularly the BBC's Laura Kuenssberg. That question she put, and Donald Trump's reaction, he said to Theresa May, and you chose that question, something along these lines, there goes that relationship.
Well, I think that a relationship between a very important country like the United States and its oldest ally, the United Kingdom, is obviously going to evolve. There are going to be things that we disagree on. All presidents have disagreed with British Prime Ministers from time to time. A great example is Margaret Thatcher in the way that she worked closely with both Ronald Reagan and George Bush. There were times when they disagreed. There were times when she had to give a bit of backbone to George Bush, if you remember, during the Kuwait War. And equally so with Ronald Reagan. They had disagreements over Grenada when the Americans went into Grenada. But actually, our friendship is so deep that ultimately what matters is that our Prime Minister has been invited to the White House, the first leader of any world democracy to go to the White House since Donald Trump has become president. That says everything about our special relationship. OK,
just let's talk about this state visit, and back to you, Mr McNeil. And you mentioned potentially visiting Balmoral and maybe going to where you are now, the Isle of Lewis. I mean, would he be welcome in Scotland? Would any members of the Scottish government agree to meet him, given what Nicola Sturgeon has said about him, given what Alex Salmond has said about him?
Well, I think Nicola Sturgeon's words were optimistic when he became President of the United States. She hoped that Donald Trump, the President, would be a very different man from Donald Trump, the candidate. On the day Donald Trump was elected, I went through the village of Tongue in Lewis and contrasted that with the scenes I saw in Kenya when Barack Obama was elected. And the Kenyan scenes on the television were one of rapturous and delight and happiness. In Tongue in Lewis, where Donald Trump's mother was from, it was all very quiet and silent. And people are quite uneasy with Donald Trump and the tone he's taken, which is unfortunate, actually. Right. Same on the day of his inauguration as well. Actually saw his first cousin driving through Stornoway at the time. Okay. You know, it was quite. It should have been a great time of happiness and joy for us as Hebrideans and more widely as Scots, but actually it wasn't because of Donald Trump, the candidate, and the tone he's chosen to take. And then immediately afterwards, the huff he took about the pictures and the fact he stopped American State Departments, federal government departments from tweeting. Even the employees of NASA now have got a rogue account so they can get information out. So there are aspects of what Donald
Mr.
Trump is doing.
I'm sorry, we are nearly out of time and you are monopolising it. I just want to ask Mr. Capes, lastly, because we never got from you, was it worth it in the end then, given what we heard from
I think it's important that any British Prime Minister has a good relationship as best they can with the United States government and President. Tony Blair had an excellent relationship with Bill Clinton. He also had to work at having a relationship with George Bush, because whoever is the American President, the United States and the United Kingdom have economic and defence and security, and we are both permanent members of the UN Security Council. We have an interest in it.
As you know, we're out of time. Mike Gapes, Andrew Rossendale and Angus McNeil, thank you all very much indeed.